that. And is it different for somebody who's been here for 30 years versus somebody who was born and raised here?
No, I think there's a basic fabric of Montana that we all depend upon, and I think Gianforte is he's pulling on the most important threads of that fabric. This place where we don't pull rank on each other, where all kids have the same opportunity, where we have access to our public lands and waters. He's yanking on every single part of that. And so when we say get our Montana back, it means a place where we have fair taxation, where a governor doesn't raise taxes on homeowners and give great big corporations a tax break. A Montana where our schools are funded, where we have the 51st worst entry-level teacher pay in the country. Puerto Rico beat us. We have 1,004 teacher vacancies. Unforgivable. We have a governor who has sued to block a public river access and is yanking on the very access to our public lands that we all depend upon. He is commercializing our wildlife. He is dismantling fish, wildlife, and parks. And so when we say get our Montana back, it's about restoring that basic fabric of equalization and egalitarianism that Montana really is founded on and that we all love so much.
So let's go back and talk about guns, which we did earlier in our talk. The governor signed a bill last year prohibiting state and local law enforcement in Montana from enforcing federal bans on firearms, ammunitions, and magazines. Now, anytime there's an election, there's the big fear that some candidate, some politician is going to come and take away the guns, which is a very common theme in all of this. If you were elected, would you change any of that earlier legislation? And what are you telling the gun-owning community of Montana about the future of their ownership?
Well, I'm a gun owner. I've sold 3 million guns. I'm proud of owning guns, and I'm proud of the right to self-defense, and I will continue to uphold that. And I think as gun owners, we also have to be responsible. So basic things like background checks, make sure that irresponsible people don't have guns. It's important to all of us. Republican moms don't like dropping their kids off at school and worrying about their kids, and Democrat moms don't like it either. We all fear it. And I think as gun-owning citizens, it's incumbent on us to stand up when irresponsible things happen. And I think of a really pertinent example. It wasn't long ago, we had a guy in front of the school, one of the schools in Billings, marching up and down the street right across from the school with a loaded AR-15. Not okay, right? It's not okay, and gun owners ought to be the first to say, knock that off. We can't have that kind of thing scaring our kids. It's not okay to praise radicalization and for that to happen. And that's the responsible thing to go do. People who care about their gun ownership, that's what they'll do to preserve their gun ownership. So I view myself as the pro-gun candidate.
Talk to me about red flag laws. I know that's been discussed in the legislature, but it didn't happen. Is that something we should look at? That's to help people in a mental health crisis be able to lock their guns up.
Yeah, red flag laws, or also called ERPO laws, extreme risk protection laws. I think it's really important, especially for women, oftentimes women in partner abuse, that when we have people in peril and threatened, people who are dangerous to themselves or to their partners, to their wives, to their girlfriends. It often is a male threatening their wife or girlfriend. I think it's really important that we have good, responsible legislation to keep those people alive. We need, of course, we need legal means to make sure that it's not abused. But look, I want to help people protect themselves against irresponsible and dangerous actions. And I don't think any gun owner really thinks it's okay to have somebody who is threatening to harm themselves or others have easy access to guns.
You don't think Republicans might say, okay, that's the first step in infringing on my rights?
I think the first step on infringing on our rights is not standing up for responsibility. As a gun owner, I want to make sure that I keep my gun owning rights, and everybody too. And I think we have to care about other citizens in our communities. And so I'm not proposing any new laws. I'm not proposing taking anybody's guns. I'm just proposing that we be responsible, and that's what my book's about. That's what my life has been about.
All right, so now we're going to dive into property taxes. I know you want to lower residential property taxes. How would you do that? And then I know because that's the funding mechanism for local governments, how would they then make up that money?
Yeah, so important to note here, the previous 4 governors, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, so Roscoe and Martz, 2 Republicans, Schweitzer and Bullock, 2 Democrats, were faced with a very similar situation to what we just encountered. Residential home values went up. That means that tax rates were getting ready to be jacked up. The governors show up, just like Governor Gianforte did before the legislative session, and each one of these governors is given a memo. And the memo says, we have the one that Gianforte received, and there's a spreadsheet on it that says, Governor, if you don't lower the state property tax rate, the multiplier, then all of these homeowners are going to get walloped with this big tax increase. Well, the previous 4 governors, they look at this memo and they say, no, 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 I'm not doing that. We want to make sure that homeowners don't get their property taxes jacked up. So 4 governors did that. Martz and Roscoe, Bullock and Schweitzer. Gianforte does exactly the opposite. Not only does he allow the property taxes to be jacked up, he puts it in his budget. And then he tells the legislature to pass his budget with the increased taxation in it. The state didn't need that money. We had a $2.5 billion surplus. Billion with a B. We didn't need extra money. When he did that, he gives big tax breaks to Northwestern Energy, pipeline companies, telecommunications companies, and by the way, somehow everybody's property taxes went up except for his. His home in Helena went down 7%, 6.91%. The surrounding 75 homes all went up. How did that happen? We still don't have an answer to that.
Let me just ask, did yours go up and was it equal to your neighbors then?
Our taxes did go up. I don't remember exactly how much, but ours went up about like everybody else's here in the neighborhood, yeah.
I'm going to ask this, sales tax. Would that help with some of our financial problems?
So I'm in favor of local option sales taxes. Whitefish has one just north of here. I think communities should be able to should be allowed to capture some of the tourist income. I want to be very specific though. I'm not in favor of any kind of sales tax that's regressive. So if it makes it harder on working people to buy groceries or makes everyday life of Montana citizens more expensive, not in favor of it. And the reason I'm against a statewide sales tax is for that reason exactly. The proposals have been that it would make it harder and more expensive on working people in this state. So working people pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes than wealthy people do. Greg Gianforte is a wealthy person. He long advocated for a statewide sales tax for many, many years. I'm against that because I want to make it easier on working people, not harder.
So the governor had a housing task force to take a look at the rising cost of housing, which is ridiculous in Montana, plus the inventory is pretty low. Yeah. Do you have a plan to help more Montanans be able to afford their homes? Yeah,
a few things. First off, this property tax thing has made it much more difficult on homeowners. It's raised rent on everybody because no rental home qualified for any kind of rebate. There was a bunch of red tape rebates that Gianforte did. No rental home qualified for that. So if your rent went up in the last couple of years, you can thank property taxes for that. Also, we have low income tax credits that have been established from previous administrations, bipartisan majorities, and we're not funding them, we're not using them. We should use that state program that's already in place. And we have a Department of Labor that Gianforte is using as some culture war cudgel. Why we're not using a Department of Labor to help build up and establish good working folks, let's say union working folks, electricians, carpenters, all of these people that can help build more housing. Why aren't we using our state agency and programs for that? Those are just 3 places where I'd start.
Okay. I know, just you talk property taxes and when they go up, it's not a matter of, I feel, being angry, it's being scared. Yeah. Because like my mortgage goes up a couple $100, yeah. That's huge.
Well, so I remember, you can find it, it's posted on our social media. We had an event in Whitefish, and there was a guy there, his name was Kurt, he's 68 years old. And he told us this story about having to go to work, back to work at 68, because he couldn't afford his property taxes. They had almost doubled. And something he said really specifically to me that will stick with me forever. He said, you know, Montana has always been a beautiful place to live, but the people who made it beautiful can't afford to live here anymore. People are worried about that. Folks on fixed incomes who have had their homes paid off for 10 or 15 years, they worked their whole lives to do it, and all of a sudden they get a $3,000 tax increase. They can't afford that. We are forcing people out of their homes. It didn't have to happen. We had a $2.5 billion surplus, billion with a B, and we raise everybody's property taxes? Why? Why? It didn't have to happen, and again, the previous 4 governors didn't raise taxes, this one did.
So you become governor, you're going to fix the multiplier?
Absolutely. It's an easy thing. It's one number in the state code. It's actually a couple because we want to make sure we roll back that there's an increase on small business too. So we want to make sure we roll that back. But the multiplier on residential homes is 1.35. The governor was told, it's in the memo. You can see it's from, I believe, November of 2023, and it says, roll back the multiplier to 0.94 or everybody's going to get a property tax increase. He left it alone. He raised everybody's taxes.
All right, let's move on to the environment. Your sons were plaintiffs in the Held lawsuit, and for those who don't know what that is, that's where Montana youth sued to demand a clean and healthful environment as required in the state constitution in our state, and they won. We know Eastern Montana specifically really relies on the energy industry. There's mining and coal. We have the Stillwater mine that's laying off 700 people.
Yeah.
A couple of mills in Missoula have just closed.
Yeah.
How are you going to balance the economy with the environment when it comes to this? Because that's frightening to be a miner,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're out of work.
The Stillwater thing is terrible, and I can tell you that mining company and the way they work with the community, really a shining example of a really responsible mining company and responsible mining operation. I'm also proud of the kids for standing up for their constitutional rights, and the Held decision will have no impact on the mining industry and the Stillwater situation. That's Russians have dumped palladium onto the world market, and that's costing those great folks their jobs. We need to do what we can. Senator Tester, by the way, is sponsoring a bill to outlaw Russian palladium, and so I would like to see us do that. As far as the energy industry in Eastern Montana, there are things changing that are outside of our control. It's much like gravity. It's going to pull on Montana whether we want it to or not. And I have been a big advocate for small-scale nuclear being put into Colstrip. We already have, and working people ought to be at the center of that. Working people have electrified this country. They've played a huge part in Colstrip. And I love the idea of small-scale nuclear plugging into all that infrastructure that we have. We have all the power lines there. We have the good, hardworking folks that are there. Wyoming is already working on small-scale nuclear. And I think our energy infrastructure is going to change, but that doesn't mean working people or Eastern Montana won't be at the center of it. We just need to have a governor who believes in being responsible and looking towards the future instead of looking towards the past.
It's funny you should say that, because my next question is, what do you think should be the future of Colstrip? And Wyoming is looking at nuclear energy. Should Montana?
I promise you, I did not get the
I don't
questions
know.
in advance. But again, small-scale nuclear it makes so much sense. We need base-level power. Here after dark or when it gets really cold, we all want base-level power. We need something to provide that, and I think small-scale nuclear holds a lot of promise, and Colstrip is the perfect place for it.
And I bring up Held just because your children were in it, and you obviously care about the environment.
Yeah.
So I think people who live in a place where energy and mining and that's important to them might think, oh no, you're the candidate who's going to try to take all that away in favor of growing more trees.
No, look, all Montanans care about their environment. Almost everybody loves to hunt or fish or hike or float or swim, do all the stuff that we love as Montanans. And our Constitution provides us a guarantee to a clean and healthful environment. And I think we ought to have a governor who embraces science, not dismisses it. He urged and passed legislation that prohibited state regulating agencies from even considering science, even doing the right thing, even moving towards the future, like small-scale nuclear. And we need a governor who leads instead of does that sort of irresponsible action.
All right, let's move on to CI 128. It's on the ballot. If
Yeah.
passed, it would put in the Montana Constitution a woman's right to an abortion.
Yeah.
How do you intend to vote on that?
I'm voting yes, and very proudly so. And my running mate, Rafe Grable, is the attorney who helped craft that initiative, and he fought very hard despite some egregious unconstitutional actions from the Secretary of State and the Attorney General to get it on the ballot. And I'm very proud that it's on the ballot. We have a governor who has signed 5 restrictive abortion bills and said he promises to sign more. He said his proudest achievement was signing Senate Bill 154. Senate Bill 154 would strip the right to privacy from our Montana Constitution. That means women in this state, all people in fact, would not have bodily autonomy. You would not have the freedom over your own body. There is nothing more anti-freedom than that. You have a governor who says you don't have your right to privacy. That's wrong. I-128 would enshrine the right to an abortion in our Constitution and save our right to privacy, and I'm for it.
Let's say 128 fails, but you do become governor. How are you going to protect women's rights? How do you fight for that?
I'm going to veto every single irresponsible anti-abortion bill and bill to attack women's right to privacy. Gianforte signs everything that comes across his desk. We will veto everything, and we will fight. Rafe and I will fight to enshrine the right to privacy in our Constitution. Gianforte and a bunch of radicalized Republicans want to rip the right to privacy apart. We're very much against that.
Montana's Constitution is pretty stout in its right to privacy.
Man, our Montana Constitution, for people watching this, if you've not read the preamble to our Constitution, and frankly just read the whole document, it provides us with some unbelievable enlightened rights. The right to know what our government's doing. These were 100 common citizens that came together in 1972. The only requirement was that they could not be a sitting politician. They set themselves alphabetically, and they produced one of the most wonderful governing documents in the history of the nation, maybe in the history of the world. So we have the right to know. We have the right to an equal public education. We have the right to a clean and healthful environment. And we have the right to privacy. People in Montana are afforded the right over their own bodies. I think it's a low bar for a governor to say, I'm for the right to privacy and for people to have the freedom over their own bodies, but I will step over that bar, and Gianforte refuses to.
Let's go to Medicaid. The redetermination process led to healthcare worker layoffs across the state. Over 100,000 Montanans
136,000.
Yep, there you go. Are you reading my notes here?
No.
We're kicked off Medicaid. Nursing homes have had to close. They talk about it a lot in the legislature. Nothing ever happens. Some people say, you know, the legislature should have done more. Likely it's going to come up again in January. What are your plans for this?
So two things on Medicaid. Number one, Gianforte did kick 136,000 Montanans off of their medical coverage. For the most part, there were some renewal that needed to be checked on, but he was egregiously and morally wrong in the way that he kicked these folks off. Many of them are working people. Many of them are permanently eligible. They're in homes. We as Montanans have always been a place that helped each other. We didn't hate each other. And for him to kick these people off, to hurt them, I spoke to the executives at the Billings Hospital, and that day, a guy had come in who had been kicked off Medicaid by Gianforte, so he couldn't afford his heart medication. And then 2 weeks later, while I was there, he came in, had a massive heart attack, and was in the ICU. And all of us are paying for that. Medicaid is not a those people problem. It's all of us. When we kick those folks off Medicaid, those folks who deserve to have coverage, we cost that man his heart meds, then he's in the ICU. We have to bear that expense as a society, and it's morally wrong what we did to him. In 2025, Medicaid expansion again is up for renewal. There are lots of folks in the Republican Party who say they won't renew it. Greg Gianforte refuses to say what he would do, which means he will not renew it either. And if you want to see a bunch of folks who are worried about what will happen to the state, go talk to healthcare executives, a lot of them Republicans. They tell me if Medicaid is not expanded again, mental health care coverage will go away, substance abuse programs will go away, ambulance services will go away. In eastern Montana, where folks travel 70 or 80 miles for health care coverage, it'll be more like 150 or 250 miles. Rest homes will continue to close down. Medicaid expansion has been immeasurably good for this state. It's a 90-10 federal split. The federal government pays 90% of the cost, we pay 10%. And it has led to a healthier population, a more vibrant population. It's a pro-business thing to do. So yeah, I'm for Medicaid expansion, and I would fight hard to get it done. The last governor who did it was Governor Steve Bullock. He was a Democrat working with a Republican legislature. And he called upon good, decent Republicans to do a good, decent thing. And along with Democrats, they got something really good done for Montana. I look forward to doing that again and working with good, decent Republicans who know it's the right thing to do.
So last year, the governor signed a $1 billion Republican tax rebate tax cut package into law, calling it the largest tax cut in Montana history. Do you think that was productive? Do you think if you're elected, you would maintain that or roll it back? Or how would you handle the cuts that were made?
Well, first off, I've already pledged we're not going to have any opt-in rebates, and we're not going to need a property tax rebate because we're going to roll everybody's property taxes back. A lot of people may have got a one-time or a two-time property tax rebate, but you had to opt in for it, meaning you had to find your geocode, you had to find what your last year's taxes were, you had to go apply for it. Gianforte can send you 3 notices, so he has your address, he knows you paid taxes. Why is he making you opt in for this rebate? 66,000 people did not get their rebates. Why? They may have not known what their geocode was. They didn't have time to go apply. Why didn't Gianforte just send them the money? It's their money. So yeah, I think the rebate was, I appreciate him sending everybody's money back to them. It's their money, but we shouldn't have had to do that. He shouldn't have raised everybody's property taxes in the first place.
All right, let's go to public lands. That's always a big scary thing. There's always the threat that acres could be sold or privatized, fences around hunting areas. A lot of people are worried that the rich, they've discovered us, they've got the cash, and they've got the clout to take those lands away. How do we protect our public lands?
Public lands are a huge, huge thing for me. And I think the very nature of why we live in Montana, what we all love to do, for a lot of people depends on access to public lands and our stream access. Gianforte is the only governor in the history of all governors to ever sue to block a public river access. That's wrong. Shouldn't be allowed for any state, but certainly not for the state of Montana. He refuses to recognize corner crossing, meaning when two corners of public land come together, we now have technology inside of most people's phones that you can walk right to the corner and step from one public parcel to another public parcel. It should be legal in the state for us to access our public lands in that way. I promise to make corner crossing legal. And I will fight any effort. There is an effort in Utah going on right now, led by the governor of Utah, Republican governor of Utah, to try to take back almost 18 million public acres in the state of Utah. Greg Gianforte gets his marching orders and his policy marching orders from the same folks. We're not going to touch our public lands. We're going to enhance our access to public lands. We're going to make corner crossing legal. And I promise you, I will never sue to block a public river access like this guy.
So let's talk about teacher pay. You talked about it a little bit earlier. We're last, pretty much. And the issue makes a little bit of noise every time the legislature convenes, but nothing is ever done about it in the end. Our state constitution requires us to provide a quality education.
Yep.
I mean, literally, the state constitution says, since that's
We're
not
falling down to our kids.
Since it's not happening, should the state be sued? What do we do to fix this problem?
We are definitely falling down, and we just had Missoula just laid off 72, 75 teachers. Helena laid off 51. So many of the schools across the state have gone to 4-day weeks. We are falling down on our promise to our kids. I have a kid, Lander, who I'm very proud of, made it through the COVID years. It was difficult, and he graduated largely because he had a vibrant arts and music program in Flathead High here. And yet, music and arts programs across the state are being threatened. It's not a quality public education if we don't provide our kids also access to arts and music. I think we have to have a governor who values public education, and I think public education is the backbone of our democracy. This guy detests public education. How do I know? Because every time he gets a chance, he proposes some privatization scheme, or he gives away his money to organizations that advocate for the privatization of our education. He wants to make money on it. I don't. I want to fulfill the promise to our kids. I want our teachers to be paid. I want to bring people together who are dedicated to public education, and we have an incredible problem coming down the tracks on almost every single one of our school districts, these big budget shortfalls. I just want people to know that property tax, the increased property tax they paid, that increase did not go to the schools. It went to the general fund. It's sitting there for Gianforte to give away in some sort of tax scheme, maybe to big corporations again. We need a governor who cares about public education, and I promise you I do. Rafe and I running as two people whose action and rhetoric will match. If we say we care about this, we will fight for it and we will do it. We are proud products of public school. Our kids are public school kids. Rafe's wife is a teacher. This courses through our veins, and it's something we owe our kids.
Why don't we pay them more? What's the problem there?
Look, there's several problems that have led to this. One problem is we have a state law that was passed that limits school districts in raising their budgets to 3% a year. Well, when you have an inflationary situation like we've had over the last few years, something's got to give, and it's often teacher salaries. For a lot of districts, their salaries are their biggest line item. And again, we need to repeal that law, but we also need a governor who will get in there and advocate for updating our funding system and putting teachers at the top. They deserve it. Again, we are 51st in entry-level teacher pay. A territory beat us. That should be offensive to Montanans, and I think it's unconstitutional.
So what can you offer Montana's sovereign nations as governor?
This is a big deal for me too. I made the promise early on. Brian Schweitzer did a very good job of this. I want tribal members of every single tribe and sovereign nation in this state to be appointed to and sit on every single board and commission where the governor appoints leadership. We should have, our native folks should not only have a voice, their voice should be at the table. They deserve to be at the table. Gianforte has rolled almost all that back. He has removed Native folks from this administration, and I have promised to put Native folks every single place that there is a board and commission that the governor appoints. We need to have Native representation there so that their voice is there. I promise to do that.
So I've covered Montana politics for more than 30 years, and usually Democrats are pretty quiet. They don't usually use the word fascism in their campaign, but you did when describing Governor Gianforte's leadership. Yeah. That's a big word. Why go there? Why say that word?
Look, when you have somebody who wants to roll back voting rights, who wants to make it harder on women, who wants to take freedom away from people, who takes Native folks, like we just discussed, off of boards and commissions, who says that same-day voter registration is wrong. These are things that are not in keeping with the Montana that I know. They're anti-freedom. Yeah, I say things plainly. Yes, our social media is loud and proud. I'm not polished. I don't have a teleprompter to tell me exactly what to say all the time. I believe in these things. I say them like I mean them, because I do mean them. And it's wrong to attack the freedoms of Montanans the way he has. I don't think it's in any way keeping with the Montana that I know and love and has made me and just about everybody I know a better person. I'm not going to shy away from saying it like it is.
So why did you choose Rafe Graybill, and what would his role be if he is the lieutenant governor?
Rafe Graybill grew up, he's my running mate. He will be our lieutenant governor when we win. He's a public school kid that grew up in Great Falls. He's fifth generation Montanan. He has stood up for our constitutional rights. He has sued this governor and this attorney general 19 times over unconstitutional actions, and he has won 19 times. Rafe should not have to be there doing this. For decades, there was hardly ever a constitutional challenge that came before the courts here. Why? Because you didn't have a governor doing blatantly unconstitutional things. Now we have Rafe here, and I'm glad that he is here. He's an accomplished attorney with a beautiful young Montana family. His first little girl just became a public school student in Helena. Very proud to have him on. But when Rafe comes on board, we're going to make sure that we strengthen people's freedoms in the Montana Constitution, because it's under attack right now.
Another thing that's new about your campaign is your social media presence. I mean, some people dabble in it, but you really go for it. Who's that for? How did that evolve, and who are you hoping to reach?
Look, we want to be open and transparent to voters. We want you to see what our campaign's about. And you should follow us on social media, because it's fun. We laugh. We're not apologetic about laughing. We have a good time. We have 2 rules on our campaign: have fun and win. Because a lot of policy is decided on a Tuesday in November, so that winning is important. But if you want a window into who we are, look at our social media. Every day we post new and exciting and fun, sometimes serious stuff. But I think it's really important that we communicate with the voters. We be transparent about who we are. This governor has failed to hold real public meetings, any kind of town hall, for 4 years. He doesn't take questions from voters. He doesn't, stand up in front of voters, except for just a couple little ones that he picks and puts in a cafe, and then they say nice things to him. He calls that a public meeting. That's not a public meeting. I think it's really important that he stands up and be transparent, and that we lead by example too. So that's part of what our social media is, what it is.
What would the first thing be? What was the first thing you would do if you win the governor's chair?
Well,
Day one.
yeah, one of the first things we're going to do is call for the property taxes to be rolled back. It requires the governor to lead, and then it requires him to bring in legislators who want to fix this, because they have to pass his proposed budget. So we're going to make sure that we roll back these property taxes to the rates that don't involve this egregious jacking up of everybody's taxes. That's the first thing we're going to do. And then we're going to go to work on public education and public lands.
Will you be able to get anything accomplished if you're a Democrat in the gubernatorial's chair and you've got
Absolutely.
GOP-controlled House?
Look, if you're a Montanan who values limited government, and a lot of people do, I'm one of those. I don't want overarching, egregious government. I want good, effective government. Some of the best things in Montana have come when you have split government, right? You have a Democratic governor, you have a Republican legislature. Why? Because that requires that the best ideas rise to the top, because they know there's a potential veto sitting in the governor's chair. When you have a governor and some dangerous radicals who work together and just pass everything, that's a lobbyist dream. We should want a governor to hold our legislature accountable, and vice versa. And so I think of, again, back to what Steve Bullock did with Medicaid expansion, a Democratic governor who worked with lots of Republicans to do something really good for the state. I think there's a rich tradition of divided government, and I look forward to the day in January when we start it again.
So I'm out of questions. Is there anything I did not ask you that you would like the voters to know?
I just want people to know, what this race is really all about. I'm sure that we've all walked into a bar, a place where we all gather, someplace fun, where we don't pull rank on each other, where it doesn't matter what your pedigree is, or what your trust fund is, or how tall you are, or who you love, or any of that stuff. This has always been a place that lifts people up and respects people for who they are. It's a live and let live place. And I often talk about going into a bar and not knowing where you're talking to a cowboy or a hippie or a school teacher or a cowboy hippie school teacher, right? We all know these folks who just fight to make it, and we don't pull rank on each other. This governor is trying to make this state into a place where there's a narrow path for the rich and advantaged billionaires like him and their kids, people with trust funds and private jets, whether it's education or healthcare, whatever it is, and then there's a lesser path for everybody else in Montana. And that has never been the Montana that any of us know and love. This is a place where when we step onto our public stream access, we're all equal. When kids step across the threshold in a public school, they're all equal. When we have access to our public lands, they're all equal, right? We all are. This guy wants to privatize everything. He wants to tear at the very fabrics that has made this place, this live and let live, egalitarian purple place. I'm against that. I do want our Montana back, and we can get it back. This can be a place where we don't pull rank on each other, and I look forward to making that happen.
Mr. Busse, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.